There's a church from Milton that wanted me to speak this Sunday, and I said, well, I'm booked. And they said, well, how about next Sunday? And I said, well, that would mean I have to spend a week at the beach. And it's like so that didn't take much elbow twisting there. So what a blessing that is to be here. And what a blessing it is to have, you guys are blessed to have a pastor like Pastor Cooley. You know, amen. He stands strong on this issue, and this is a vital issue. Colossians 2:8 says, beware lest any man spoil you. That's like rob you. You know, it could be rob you from the joy of the Lord, rob you for the purpose of your life. You know, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit. Philosophy is the lover of wisdom, and vain deceit is empty lies. And that's what I see our government education as. There's a lot of lies in there, and they're searching wisdom. So beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. And so that's where Satan's making his hay. You know, he's getting people to chase something other than Christ. And I got an uncle who's 98, and he asked me, why do the youth today have such despair? And it was just kind of came out of the blue. So I just, you know, maybe it's what they're being taught, maybe it's what they're being injected with, maybe it's what they're seeing on the screen. And as I think about it, why is there so much despair? I think it's because they don't know who they are. They don't know that they're made in the image of God. They don't know that God has given them talents to use to glorify Him, and I think that's where the joy is. You know, what are they being taught in school? That they're mutated animals. That came from pond scum. That came from exploding stars. That came from nowhere. And that takes a lot more faith than to believe that they were made by a creator. So this is, you know, it's great to be back here again. It's fun. But this is a practical experience that I had. In 2024, I went through our government textbooks, and I found a whole bunch of errors, and you can see them on the black back table there. And I went to the curriculum director, and I said, you know, there's a bunch of errors here based on science and nature and PubMed and the Smithsonian. What you're teaching in the class is contrary to what they're saying. And she said, well, we're just teaching the state standards. And I said, well, what standard says that we're 1.6% different from chimpanzees? And she didn't respond, but the superintendent emailed me and said, we're in the process of reviewing your concern and our response with our district's law firm. Instead of contacting the publisher and say, why are you contradicting these science journals? They contact their law firm. And so what do? You go to the school board meeting and point it out to see if they want accurate textbooks. And I did that for half a year. And you can see this on my YouTube channel. It's Solidify Your Faith on YouTube. Well, and that reminds me, every family should get one of each of these videos. These are free. I forgot to mention that this morning, but these are free. You know, one of them has to do with the Revival of Truth, where we looked at the COVID corruption and the behind the vaccine curtain and what powerful evolutionists have in store for us. And let's see, who came here because they heard about it last night? Or yesterday? Who was from the conference? There we go. There we go. Well, you missed it this morning, but you can see it on Facebook. If you go into their Facebook page, you can get up to speed on this. And you can see this all at rumble.com, and then go into Revival of Truth to get up to speed. And then this one's got 3 creation videos on it. And both of these are kind of dated, but there's still some good concepts in there. And one of these, I got the microphone at a state college not far from here, and they had 120 some students there, and you can hear that talk. And so yeah, make sure to grab those. And then also we've got this handout. This handout has my cliff notes from my debate with a science teacher. You can see that on Standing for Truth. I debated Planet Peterson. And then on the back you got a bunch of really neat websites and YouTube channels, and I circled some hydroplate things there. And then there's a checklist on the back. Oh, but in the middle too, what I'm trying to do is change the debate, change the parameters of it. It's not science versus religion. It's blind chance versus creation. You know, that's what it is. Mutations, blind chance, you know, Big Bang, blind chance. When I'm at college, it's like, you think this building got put together by chance? And they'd say, no, it's absurd. Well, how much more absurd to think our bodies got put together by chance? And then I give you some, you know, we all believe in miracles. We all believe, even the atheists, you know, they believe matter from nothing, which violates the first law of thermodynamics. You know, life from non-life, it violates the law of biogenesis, and it just goes on and on. But you guys can check this out later. And then there's some critical thinking questions. You know, has it ever been observed? How do you know that? And one of them now is, are you profiting from the information that you're giving us? And what accurate predictions have you made? And I brought this up yesterday at the end of my talk. It's like, You publish papers. What if you didn't allow a paper to be published unless they had some predictions with it? And so that would save us time and money, But I think then when the creationists are right, we can have a published prediction that turned out to be right. So again, they grab one of them. And then when you grab one of these, you're going to be tempted to throw it away someday. But don't do that. Just give it to somebody else. And so then they can get equipped to fight this battle. And then there's this inconvenient study thing on the back. But grab that. Okay, so I went to the school board. And I went there 6 times, even over Christmas. And I was able to wish him a Merry Christmas. And one guy was happy to hear it. And I also said, but Jesus did say, if you cause one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better if a millstone were hung around your neck and you'd be cast into the depths of the sea. So what impact are you having here? And so you can see those comments on my school board playlist, and hopefully Christians and taxpayers get upset enough to get this changed. We shouldn't be funding this. But anyhow, so what did I do with this information? I had a booth at the fair, and I had this question on my marker board: should St. Cloud ISD 742 remove the errors in their textbooks? And people could vote. And it's like, and that's a kind of a loaded question, but there are errors in there, and so it's 52-10. People want it changed, and so this is what I screenshotted from our science textbooks. Okay, this is what I'm paying for. I did this in 2024. This is 2024 textbooks. And when you're in these discussions, when they say, well, I believe in science, and I hear that a lot at college, they say, well, what do you mean by science? And they say, and it's like, well, experiments, It's like, oh, the scientific method, that's observable and testable and repeatable and falsifiable. Yeah, they say, but evolution is none of that. Molecules to man evolution. It's not observable and testable. They're just inferring a lot of it. But our textbooks that says the National Academy of Sciences defines science as the use of evidence to construct testable explanations and predictions of natural phenomena. So it's got to be testable. Some textbooks, they define science as, natural processes to explain natural reasons for natural processes. They define God out of science. Okay, but anyhow, science has to be testable. So if it's not testable according to this, it's not science. Okay, and then defining evolution. This is a screenshot. Came from a common ancestor 3.3 billion years ago. That's that tree of life, and we've never found that. So this is not science. It's not observable or testable. And there's a video that says every representative of every known phyla on Earth evolved in the ocean. Is that science? No. No, that's just a belief system. A godless belief systems. It says scientists have tracked the lineage of human evolution all the way back to lemur-like creatures. Can we test that? Can we see a lemur turning into a person? No, that's not science. And when I go to community colleges, some open the door and welcome me with open arms, some slam the door and say, stay out. But this one opened me the door. And so I set up a table, kind of like in the back, and the instructors came. And one of the instructors, he said that, that when he does science, he has them do a journal of fuzzy words, like might have, could have, probably. And so then the kids know when they are being taught science and when they're being taught belief systems. All right, so this is not science. And then for a rock fossil to form, the body of the dead animal and plant must undergo fast, complete burial, right? For a fossil to be formed, it has to be buried rapidly. And so therefore, any layer of rock that has fossils in it was laid down rapidly. That's the whole geologic column. That's sign of a flood. Fossils show it's sign of a flood, not millions of years. Okay, and then it says if you trace the history of water back billions of years, it is likely that water provided liquid environment for life to begin. Well, that's not science either. Likely, that's a big fuzzy word. So cross that out. And then this is from the textbook at St. Cloud State. It says that they were trying to explain how life began. It says somehow, despite this harsh environment, living organisms appeared 3.8 billion years ago. Somehow. That's a huge fuzzy word. So that's not science. So I just cross out those whole sentences if you ever see one of them. And I talk to kids too. They say, they'll say, well, I don't believe in God. And I say, okay, let's play in your ballpark. Without God, how did life begin? They don't have an answer. They think they have, but I tell them, go into evo2.org. That's EVO, the number 2.org. $10 million. All you have to do is solve the largest mystery in history, how genetic code inside cells got there and how cells intentionally self-organize and communicate, then purposely adapt. $10 million, have at it. You want a summer job? Here you go. Good luck. And then on this handout, the second website under YouTube is called Long Story Short. And it's animation of what's happening inside of our cell. And it's cartoons, so I can understand it. But yeah, it's really, really good. And it's saying like your DNA is like a library that's on fire. And the librarians are copying it as fast as they can. And it talks about Eigenmann's paradox. He said that, you know, for a long strand of DNA to form, there has to be a repair system. And yet the repair system is a long strand of DNA. So there's all these things pointing to a creator. And then it talks about how if your cell was the size of Sweden, it has to keep out stuff the size of a fly, but it has to let in things like the size of Monaco or whatever. You know, and they can't even make a cell membrane, much less a cell. They are so far from the origin of life. They're farther now than when the Miller-Urey experiment back in the 50s, when they say, oh, we made amino acids, building blocks of life, but now it's way more complex. So the origin of life is falling apart, the Big Bang is falling apart, the geologic column is falling apart, evolution is falling apart, and I submit that plate tectonics is falling apart. So this is a great time to be alive, to see all those things, and we can have a hand in it. Okay, and then it goes on to say that we do not know exactly how or when the first forms of life developed. So they're honest. They don't know how. And when I talk to the students, like, hey, how did life begin? They say, I don't know. Some of them, we don't know that. It's like, well, if you don't know how it began, how do you know God didn't do it? You know, and so they're honest, at least here. They don't know. But it doesn't go on from having them say the chemicals, the raw ingredients that make up life were constantly sloshing around, bumping into each other, and combining into new chemistry over millions of years. That process can lead to living organisms. No, it can't. And Bob Enyart got this NASA scientist to admit it on an international stage. And I encourage you to go into that, go into rsr.org/NASA-water. And he submitted this question. It's like, shouldn't this, since water breaks apart the molecules so fast, shouldn't the water be addressed more like it's a problem than the reason that there is life? But yeah, this is Bob Enyart, rsr.org. That's what I listen to when I'm driving all over the country. He's got the funnest way to teach science. There was one time I was sitting at a stoplight, and Fred Williams says that evolution is a low-grade hypothesis. And Bob says, no, it's not a low-grade hypothesis. It's a high-grade, fever-induced delusion. And he was right. You know, that's what I did. I was laughing at a stoplight. But we'll see if this one will work.
I think the question is, it posits that water is a challenge for prebiotic evolution, that because it attacks the various molecules involved.
So in some of the prebiotic things, this is something that people think about. Hydration and dehydration reactions are really important in prebiotic chemistry. And so postulating that life could evolve when there is no opportunity for an environmental separation to allow dehydration reactions actually is a problem, and people do address that.
Well, they don't address it in the science books. They're telling them that water, you know, things can come up to life in water, and she's saying that it can't. And so this is false statement number one. We're going to count these off. That's a false statement. Then it talks about there are a number of theories that attempt to explain the origin of life on Earth. The one with perhaps the most scientific support is sometimes called the prebiotic soup theory. So this is the best one they got. And these compounds can then be dissolved in the ocean of early Earth. They get transported all over the place, and they end up interacting with each other, forming more and more complex molecules, and start to have this ability to replicate. You know, and this is what Dr. Jonathan Sarfati, he's got a PhD in physical chemistry, he explains in 1 minute why life can't begin in water.
We're taught that chemical evolution started in the oceans, but you say that's the last place you'd expect to look. Why?
Well, okay, to build up a big molecule called a polymer from many little molecules called monomers, for instance, proteins from amino acids and DNA or RNA from the nucleotide building blocks, every step of the way, every combination spits out a water molecule. They call that condensation. But if you already have water molecules dissolving these things, then the water would come back and actually break that bond apart. It's called hydrolysis. So if you try to do this in water, it's the hydrolysis, the breaking apart that would happen and not the forming. In fact, chemists who want to make proteins or DNA or RNA, they exclude water as much as they can. They even have water-absorbing chemicals to draw out the water. So a primordial ocean is the last place I'd expect to find these polymers forming.
And I played this at the school board meeting. And I asked them, what degree does your science director have? What degree does your curriculum director have? If they don't have a PhD in chemistry, they should listen to this guy. And I brought this up and I emailed the curriculum director, could you or the publisher please send me a link to the scientific paper that shows how life began in water to validate what you're teaching the students? Let's see it. If you're going to teach it, let's do it. And because Dr. Gluza says there's not a scientific paper on the planet that shows how life came from non-life. And yet they're teaching it in the class. So this is false statement number 2. It says you probably figured out that water equals life. You know, water equals life, and it's like, well, how do you define life? The minimal definition of life is that the system has to be able to replicate itself. So if water equals life, if you have a glass of water on the table at night, are you going to have 2 glasses in the morning? So this is false statement number 3. And we just count them off. Evidence for evolution, it says we're only 1.6% different from chimpanzees. Oh, this one bothers me so much. And I showed them, I sent them from the NIH, it says we're 5%. And then Nature says the fickle Y chromosome, it says the common chimp and human Y chromosomes are horrendously different. You know, they're not 1.6% different, but this is how they get the 1.6.
We share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours. We may not actually be 99% chimp, but we are 100% great ape, and at least a little bananas.
Yeah, and this is a blind chance website. You know, I don't call them big bangers and evolutionists anymore. I just call them blind chancers. So this is a blind chance website. And they're saying, yeah, we're 99% similar if we exclude 18% of theirs and 25% of ours. But that's how they cook the books. So this is false statement number 4. And then we got, I guess this is the most one. This is Haeckel's fake drawings. It says animals go through similar stages of development. So notice on the right, a bird, a bunny, and a person. Notice on the left, they all look pretty much the same. And these are images of Haeckel's fake drawings. You know, back over in the 1880s or whatever, Haeckel loved the theory of evolution, but there wasn't any evidence for it. So he decided to make some. And so he drew them all out. They look the same, don't they? Well, they're frauds. Those are what they actually look like in that middle line. They don't look anything like what he drew. They don't look anything like each other. And this PhD from UCal Berkeley, of all places, has this to say.
If you go back earlier in development, the different classes of vertebrates look even more different.
According to Wells, Haeckel, and many modern textbooks, mislead students not just because of faked drawings, but because they leave out the earliest stages of embryonic development. What students are shown as the first stage of embryonic development is actually the mid-stage.
And very few textbooks show those earliest stages, and yet that's the whole point. It's the earliest stages that are supposed to be the most similar, and they're not.
Yeah, that's the whole point. It's the earlier stage, but that's the whole point. So the textbooks are lying to the kids. This is over 100 years ago this is proven wrong, but in 2015 it says how fudged embryo illustrations led to drawn-out lies at the New Scientist. It says it's embarrassing but true. Some of the most influential drawings in the history of biology are wrong, exaggerated to fit a thesis. And it seems like wherever I go, it's like, yeah, I saw that in my textbook. And this is from 1997, you know, 30 years ago almost, that they still appear in reference books such as Graves' Anatomy. And although Haeckel confessed to drawing from memory and was convicted of fraud at the University of Vienna, the drawings persist. That's the real mystery. You know, why are they still in here? Well, we'll let Eugenia Scott explain why they're still in there. She was the director of the National Center for Education, and she said this about 20 years before that 2024 textbook was written. This is what she says.
And actually, it's been known for 10 or 15 years that Haeckel's embryos are not to be relied upon. The reason why the diagrams are reproduced is because they're easily available. There's no copyright on them. It's an easy way to illustrate a point.
Well, if you have to lie to illustrate a point, maybe you shouldn't be teaching that point. You know, can you ever consider that? So this is not accurate, number 5. It says 400 million years of evolution has been conspiring against you. Can evolution conspire? You know, this is the logical fallacy of reification, where it makes something that's not real act like a human, basically. So that's false statement number 6. It says, so why are our eyes an engineering nightmare? Now that's a loaded question too. They're assuming that it's an engineering nightmare, and it's not. But this is what they think. Herein lies the problem. Our retinas are wired backwards. So you got the photoreceptors behind these cells, and they think that's a bad design. We should be more like the octopus. But the water filters out the UV light for the octopus. We live on the land. If we had octopus eyes, we'd probably be dead or blind, in 20 minutes. And so this means that nature invented the camera-like eye twice. That's that logical fallacy again. Nature can't invent anything. So false statement number 7, scientists haven't been able to come up with a working hypothesis as to why our retinas are set up backwards, and there aren't any scientifically proven positives. Well, that's because this is 2024, right? Well, back in 2015, the Smithsonian explains why it is. Here's why your eyes seem to be wired backwards. Light has to pass through the nerve cells to get to the rods and cones, but that order is no mistake. The glial cells did indeed create columns of concentrated light. And then Medical Express goes on to say that they're like fiber optics. It's an incredible design that optimizes the light, so color vision during the day is enhanced while nighttime vision suffers very little. It's an incredible design. So this is false statement number 8. Okay, and there aren't any scientific proven process. That's false statement number 9. And so here we go. And Darwin, I love this quote. He says, to suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I confess, absurd in the highest degree. I agree. It is absurd. And there's like 40 different ways that eyes work on the world, so it just happened to do that 40 different times. That would be absurd. But he goes on to say, the difficulty of believing that a perfect and complex eye could be formed by natural selection, though insuperable by our imaginations, should not be considered subversive to the theory. So it's absurd to the nth degree, but don't count that against the theory. And then it talks about, oh yeah, this is pretty neat. There's more than 208 men have been disproved. This isn't in the textbook. This is Carl Werner's The Grand Experiment, Human Evolution. He spent, that's a whole nother talk. Go into my YouTube channel, I think it's CES, Creation Science 104, where it's evolution falsified and frauds. And he thinks he's got over 100 cases of fraud in human evolution. And he says, saying that Nebraska man's tooth was an ape man when it was a pig tooth, he says that's not fraud, that's a mistake. What is a fraud is when they lied about when they found it. They said they found it a year ago when it was actually 5 years ago. Plus, they didn't show us the pig jaw when they showed what other animals they found on the site. So that's 2 cases of fraud with that one example. Okay, it talks about Lucy, our supposed ape-like ancestor. It was almost an almost complete skeleton is what it says. And there was a talk on this yesterday. Lucy's ape-like ancestor, she walked upright because of these Latola footprints. And so I asked him, and it was Carl Werner who was giving the talk too. And so during Q&A I said, how far were the footprints from Lucy? And he said 1,000 miles. 1,000 miles. Yeah, and then I said, well, did they find a human skull at Latola? And he said, yeah. And I only knew that. I knew the skull because I'd read his book. But he's a super nice guy too. Then this one, okay, so this is almost complete. This is remarkably complete. And this is nearly complete. 206 bones in our body. Just imagine a nearly complete, almost complete, markedly complete. Is this what you come up with? You got like 40 bones. So these are just bold-faced lies what they're telling the kids. And so, yeah, that's a false statement number 10. Okay, and this, you've seen this before, how they cut Lucy's hip. We don't have to show that. But you might, if you haven't seen this. It's a chimp hip. The perfect fit is an illusion.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bone seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Yeah, it better if you cut it apart and put it back the way you want it. So they're manipulating the fossils, they're manipulating the data. You know, you shouldn't have to do that if the theory is right. But you can't prop up a false idea with the truth. You have to prop up false ideas with more false ideas. And that's why I think they contacted the law firm instead of contacting the publisher. But that's just my opinion. Okay, and then you've got this, this tree of life. We're out there on the humans. And if you go back in time, we were related to something that broke off that became starfish, that broke off, and then related to something that broke off that became insects and mushrooms and bacteria. Okay, that's a big belief system, but it's never been observed. We don't find that in the fossil record, and Stephen Jay Gould, he says that. The extreme rarity of transitional fossils in the fossil record persists as a trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary tree that adorn our textbooks have only at the tips and the nodes of their branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of fossils. So because they didn't have any evidence because of Darwinian evolution, a friend of mine, when he's talking to an evolution, he says, so what denomination are you? Are you a gradualist like Darwin, where it happens slowly over time? Or are you a liberal like Goldschmidt, who said it happened all at once? That's the hopeful monster one. The first bird came from a first reptile egg. Or are you like Goldschmidt? He's more moderate. He combines them. It's basically, it happens fast, but the fossil record didn't get it. Yeah, and this is from a guy from Nature. But instead of finding the slow, smooth, progressive changes Lyell and Darwin had expected, new species appearing seemingly out of nowhere and then remaining unchanged for millions of years, patterns hauntingly reminiscent of creation. So what they find in the dirt points to creation. And so they have to do all these mental gymnastics. They don't have to believe in creator. So this is not accurate, number 11. And then it says the humpback whale is actually more closely related to the hippopotamus than the elephant. Okay, millions of years of mutations and change have given rise to both species from a common ancestor. So is that science? No, they can't do this at all. And you go into descentfromdarwin.org. You have to be a PhD or above to sign this. And it says, we are skeptical of the claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be encouraged. And it's people from all over, from Harvard, there's over 1,200 PhD scientists. And our state senator had a town meeting or something, and I'm walking to him. I'm talking about this as we're walking to the car. And I emailed them this. What did he say? It's like, it was kind of funny. And I said, it's like, yeah, the professors at St. Cloud State, they don't listen to you because you don't have any letters. I don't have any letters. We don't have letters after my name. And he said, yeah, professors are snobs. And he says, and I said, I should know because I'm one of them. I mean, he's a very engaging guy. And so I emailed him later and I said, when kids are being taught evolution, could this fact be shown to them? Hey, we just showed you evolution and 1,200 PhDs disagree with what we just taught you. He didn't respond to my email. But Clemson, UCLA, everywhere, Princeton, MIT, all these people disagree with Darwinian evolution. And it's getting so bad that they've got a new website, thethirdwayofelution.com, and they want alternative ideas of the evolutionary process. Why is that? Because evolution doesn't work. And ICR is doing incredible work at replacing it with the designed adaptability. The animals are designed to adapt to their environment. And they're having really good success with that. And he spoke at the Twin Cities Creation Science Association, and he told the students there, he says, get into biology. It's not very often when you see a paradigm fall apart and get replaced. And that's where we're living right now. So it's an exciting time, very exciting. Okay, and then it says, all of these modifications happen due to the change in the environment. And behind evolution, and explore the scientific evidence for what is considered now the unifying theme in biology by most scientists. Yeah, you better go along with it or you're going to get thrown out on your ear. You better. And that's like somebody came up at the conference and he said, yeah, I'm with Logos Research Associates, and the president at the time wanted to see catastrophic plate tectonics and hydroplate people just do the strengths and weaknesses. And the catastrophic plate tectonic people would not step up to the microphone. So this guy comes to me and he says, you know what, you would help your model if you had a geologist put together a model, the pre-flood conditions. And I said, yeah, that would help. I agreed. Yeah, that's what Pete wants us to do. Let's have a model for this. We should have a geologist. But I asked him, hey, can they do that and not get thrown out of the club? you know, because there seems to be a bias against it. And because personally, I know somebody who doesn't want to be seen on YouTube asking questions about the hydroplate. I know somebody who won't make a hydroplate video because they'll lose a lot of business with the creation organization. I know somebody who has these really neat videos, Ranger Mike videos, that a big organization won't funnel through their system because he had hydroplate on his YouTube or on his website. So that's the next domino that has to change. We have to be able to talk about this without fear of financial or whatever ramifications. Because I told the guys, man, if I was a geologist and there was a theory that was making accurate predictions, man, I would have been all over it like stink on a pig. You know, I would have been doing that, but they avoid it like the plague. They treat it like the redheaded stepsister for whatever reason. And so, yeah, but that's a tangent. But this is what I was talking about, going to ICR.org and engineered adaptability. Epigenetics is having a lot. There's sensors at every level. The molecular, the cellular, the tissue, the organ, the organism. There's sensors all through there that keep the thing alive and make the appropriate changes. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. So it says species adapt to their environment due to natural selection. No, they don't. It's designed. It's designed into them. So that's a misleading statement, number 12. And then it says, explain the relationship between humans and mice. This is the teacher's guide. This is the assignment to the kids. Explain the relationship between humans and mice. What if you put, hey, God made both of them? That's what I'd put, you know, is that right? But this is the answer that they want. They're distant related based on genetic testing and fossils of common ancestors and comparative anatomy. Okay, that's what they're looking for. You know, what's the common ancestor between a whale and a bat? They both have echolocation. And it's the same gene in each of them. I think God had a toolbox for echolocation. They just used the same thing over. And so they don't have a common ancestor, so they imagine convergent evolution. Well, it just happened twice in evolution. It explains the similarities between unrelated organisms. And so you got these different bones that they call the same name, and they say it came from a common ancestor. It's like, no, I think it came from a common designer. So that's a belief system. Let's just deal with science. I was invited into a college classroom one time, and the professor said, you got 15 minutes. You know, once the students get there, I was done in 10. And he said, well, if you were king of science, what would you do? If you were king of science for a day, what would you do? I said, I'd put all the theories on the table and I'd focus on the ones that made accurate predictions. And I wouldn't teach belief systems about the past like the Big Bang and evolution. That's a waste of time, you know? And so, but anyhow, so that's another belief system. The concept of homology, that's where they look the same, the body parts, is the idea that evolution uses the same parts. Evolution can't use anything. Evolution uses the same parts or the same building blocks to build different structures. No, it can't. But if you changed it to a creator uses the same parts to build different structures, then it works. But evolution can't do that. So that's false statement number 13. This is in the textbooks. And we can find the spur, this little white piece right here. That's what's left of the pelvis or the hip bone of the snakes from its lizard ancestors. So now the snakes are losing information. But no, that's a belief system. Dr. Carl Werner writes a paper and says, no, these are used for climbing trees or for mating. And so that's another one that's wrong. And then it talks about the universe spraying into existence. Well, let's prove that, shall we? That's not science. Then clouds of gas and dust from the Big Bang. Gravity pulled cooling matter into piles, clumping it together into dense knots, and the pressure increased, and so did the temperature of these knots and the first stars. Well, that violates Boyle's law. As they come together, the gas pressure would push it apart. And who was it? Gary Parker. He was in grad school learning about the nebula theory, how the solar system formed from a condensing dust cloud. And he said, well, how does that happen when gas pressure is 60 to 100,000 times more stronger than gravity? And the professor said, well, maybe it should be called the nebulous theory, meaning difficult to understand. And then this one, Earth's oldest rock was discovered in 2008 along Hudson Bay in northern Quebec. Okay, declarative statement. Well, in 2019, NASA came out and said the Earth's oldest rock was found on the moon. And it was formed 20 kilometers beneath the Earth's surface. How do you get from 12 miles below to the moon? Well, the hydroplate theory explains it. And I told it to the school board. Your kids would love to learn about this theory. Explain all this stuff. You know, contact me and I'll tell you more. They don't want to know. They don't want to know. Okay, so this is false statement number 14. And it just goes on and on. It says granite was an igneous rock that's material cooled inside the Earth, and it got harder. And Walt Brown says, let's see, it says, had Earth ever been molten, its dense non-radioactive chemical elements, such as gold, would have sunk to the Earth's core. Gold is 70% denser than lead, yet it's found on the surface. Then he goes on to say that if melted granite slowly cooled, the first mineral to solidify would sink to the bottom of the melt. If it were denser of the melt, it would float to the top. If it were less dense, a layer cake of minerals would form instead of granite, which is a granular mixture of minerals. Therefore, the entire Earth was never molten. And so that's throwing a lot of shade on what they're trying to teach. And this guy, he says, Robert Gentry, he found that polonium half-life, you find that in granite, and he says it's similar to if you found Alka-Seltzer bubbles frozen in ice. It had to be flash frozen. And he says that's what granite was. And then this PhD from Penn State says, I support this 20-year-old challenge as yet unmet to the scientific establishment that it produced in the laboratory even a fist-sized piece of granite and the subsequent production of polonium-218 halos in it. And they can't do it. But when they found out this went against the Big Bang Theory, they cut his funding. You know, there's certain things that they want. Okay, so prove that, evidence of plate tectonics, they got these convection currents, and there's 20 reasons why that couldn't happen. I debated a geologist from a state university last month, and I showed a bunch of scientific papers that say convection doesn't work, and one of them was from a Penrose Award winner. That's like a Nobel laureate. He says convection currents don't work, and yet that's what, and also those mantle plumes that are supposed to drive it, it gets hot here and it goes up and cools down. They've got the crossover depth. Rock melts under the extreme pressure of more than 220 miles below the Earth's surface, and it will contract, so then it'll sink. It won't come back up. So they should prove that before they put it in there. And then understanding the universe. One of the biggest mysteries of the universe is how the entire universe inflated at an extremely high rate from a point smaller than the single atom the size of a baseball. This mystery continues to plague scientists, but the laws of physics do allow for such an event. It's like, no, it doesn't. You can't get matter from nothing. It's like, since when? And so what they do, how they get around there, they say that because you can't have matter from energy. Energy can either be created or destroyed, only change from one matter to another. Okay, that's like an atomic bomb. Little matter, lots of energy. Or you got those particle accelerators. Lots of energy, smash them together, they make some matter. But you can't get it from nothing. That's the point. But it says that it can be changed. And how do they do this? Some have found contradictions between the law of conservation of energy and the Big Bang Theory. Yeah, I'm one of them. I'm one of the some. Since neither address where the singularity of condensed energy originated. However, now this is very, very, very cunning of them. The Big Bang Theory only refers to the time after the singularity began to expand. So the Big Bang starts after matter's formed, just like evolution starts after life came from non-life. And just like plate tectonics starts after subduction began. And so all these things have to happen. And so then they come up with dark matter, you know, some sort of invisible matter. These stars would not continue to follow their orbits, so they could bring up dark matter. I think it's because of spiral galaxies. They should have been wound up tight over millions of years, but we still have them. So they invent dark matter, and that's 23% of the universe. And then the universe is expanding at an accelerated rate. And they can't explain it, so they come up with dark energy. You know, the expansion of the universe was actually accelerating. Unknown cosmic force counteracts gravity, dark energy. That's 73%. So 23 plus 73 is 96% of the universe. And your theory to explain everything can only explain 4%? It's time for a new theory, and that's the hydroplate theory. Our predictions that asteroids and comets are coming true, theirs are wrong by a long shot. And then you got scientists think. You got hydrogen cooled and became helium, and that cooled, and then you got lithium. And so what did I do? And I've done this at St. Cloud State. This is at the fair. Did hydrogen and helium turn into people? And at the fair it was yes, 52, no, 161, and 45 don't know. I had that at St. Cloud State one time. A professor walks by and he says, no, hydrogen and helium did turn into people. And I asked him, well, what did the Big Bang make? And he didn't say anything, so I said it made hydrogen, helium, and a little bit of lithium. And he goes, yeah, and those turned into stars that exploded and turned into the elements that made the people. And I should have said, yeah, prove it. Let's see it. I want to see it this time. And so, yeah, we did this at St. Cloud State. It was very close. Did hydrogen and helium turn into people? No, just barely. If I would have left 10 minutes earlier, it would have been tied. So let's just go through, wrap this up real quickly. What I showed you was about 16 of them. Waters does not equal life. Millions of years of chemicals banging into each other, leading to living organisms, that's false. Okay, and they start to have the ability to replicate, that's false. 1.6% difference from chimps, that's false. And then it would be easy to do this. Just contact the publisher, take down these videos. You know, these aren't printed books. Just contact them and take it down. And I contacted the publishers and I got ghosted. These embryos, you know, animals have similar development. Well, that's false. For 100 years, that's false. Haven't been able to come up with a working hypothesis as to why her retinas are set up backwards. That's false. And then there's an almost complete skeleton of Lucy. That's false. And then this human evolution tree of life. That's false. And then species adapt to their environment due to natural selection. I say that's very misleading. They're ignoring the design that's in each one. The Earth's oldest rock was discovered in 2008 along Hudson Bay. That's false. Okay, and then I want them to prove convection currents, prove it. And then granite was molten. Well, prove it. Make it. Let's see it. Okay, so why do I do this? It's Walt Brown's book. It says, a widespread belief system seldom change when frequently reinforced by influential institutions. Okay, and also they seldom change when you're not allowed to think of anything else. You know, and this is, I think, and I talk to a lot of students, they don't have very good critical thinking skills. They're very good at regurgitating what they've been taught. They're taught what to think, not necessarily how to think. And if you could have and the creationists, we can lead in this organization. So right now, evolutionists, all they got is evolution in the textbooks in the museums. And what we could do with creationists, there's 2 flood models out there. 2 of them. You got catastrophic plate tectonics, which is a secular model sped up. And then you got hydroplate, which is based on the Bible. And I'm waiting for which museum's going to put both of them in there first and let people see and compare and contrast. And the most, again, I might have said this morning, but I definitely said it yesterday, the most popular display at any museum would have all the theories up there with their predictions underneath. How well are they doing? Hey, evolutionists, how is your vestigial organs prediction? How's your junk DNA? You know, you guys have been wrong. And then just have predictions. You know, what are the current predictions? What do you expect? And I even mentioned this yesterday. You publish papers. Don't publish them unless they make predictions. You know, let them think about what are the ramifications of this theory, and then you can see if they're doing it right. Okay, so they seldom change when you aren't allowed to think about anything, but when vast numbers of people realize they've been misled, an intellectual revolution begins. And we're in the COVID generation. Those younger kids, they know they've been misled. They're very skeptical, and they should be. And this is an exciting time. We've been misled in a multitude of areas. And the biggest one, I think, is millions and billions of years. When I do VBS, I tell the kids, whenever you hear that, your baloney detector should go off. Just, bah, there's a fairy tale coming, okay? And so we need help getting a vast number of people. We're starting this avalanche of truth, and it's gaining speed. So I encourage people to get involved in whatever way you can. Even if, and he goes on to say that these two, the Big Bang and evolution, uniformitarianism and evolution, have permeated our society. So it's not an abortion, it's just clumps of cells. And to rectify that, we need a bunch of people to get informed and inform others. And so I'm encouraging people to step up to the plate, get informed and inform others. And you can check out, I give a lot of these talks on my YouTube channel. I encourage people to have a creation club. Every month or two, invite the neighborhoods to come in and have a creation speaker or have a, show a video. Hopefully that gets off the ground at the college there. But even if it doesn't, you could do it a week before and plug people into that. That's what we do at St. Cloud. And that Creation Science 101, we do those at our public library. And those are recorded. You could just play them at your creation club. So I just encourage people to search for the truth. Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit. And that's what our whole government system is based upon. It's philosophy and vain deceit. And we need to give people an opportunity to think. And they can't think if they only see one side. They got to see both sides on every area, not just in this classroom. And that's what I encourage you to do. And that's what that table's for, so that you get all the information to make informed decisions. And then again, I encourage you to take one of these and email me if you have any questions. My email is solidifyyourfaith@hotmail.com. And then each family can have one of these. They're free. And so I'll turn it over to Pastor, and he'll give you the real truth and why this really matters.